as we've discussed today. A lot's happened at a policy level. And in planning the event, we wanted to make sure there's also a practitioner component to it. So our panels are really composed of people who are on the ground every day, working with artists, overcoming these challenges, and have a very insightful perspective. So ladies and gentlemen, please let me introduce, obviously, our first speaker here. To my right. To my right. To my right. It's Mr. George Gachara. George is the managing partner of the HEVA Fund, a finance and business support facility for the creative industries in East Africa. In this role, he works to define strategy, identify investors and partners, and assists in creative and cultural sector ventures in achieving their growth plans. George has a strong and varied background which encompasses communication and design thinking, amongst many things. He has significantly contributed to the transformation of the creative economy policy environment in Kenya and the wider region, and continues to liaise with the Kenyan government to create and implement interventions for the growth of the cultural economy. George has focused on youth development, social innovation, and arts management, working with the Nest Collective in Nairobi as a regional advisor for the Duke Edinburgh's Award as well. He is a global fellow for the International Youth Foundation and a recipient of the International Development Committee's Outstanding Leadership Award. Ladies and gentlemen, George Gachara. In an equally compelling profile, I introduce to you Michelle Constant, the CEO of Business and Arts South Africa, BASA, a private-public partnership between the corporate sector and government's Department of Arts and Culture, with the aim of developing strategic partnerships between the business and arts sectors in South Africa. Her work has seen her present papers across the world, and she also writes monthly columns on the relationship between business and art, whilst continuing to host the weekend breakfast show at the national radio station SAFM. Michelle was awarded the Arts and Culture Trust Awards Journalist of the Year 2004, the inaugural Mokoda Award for Arts and Media, Women in Government and Business, Arts and Culture in the SADC region in 2015. In 2016, she was awarded the Chevalier des Arts de Lettres from the government of France for her work in culture and the arts. Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Constant. Last but not least, we are obviously joined by Mr. Erwin Maas, a theater maker, educator, and international arts advocate from the Netherlands, based in New York City. He is Artistic Creative Director at the International Society for Performing Arts, ISPA. He is an Artistic Associate as well as the Director of the Fellowship Program for the International Performing Arts for Youth, IPAY. Co-founder and director of the Pan-African Creative Exchange, also known as PACE, and the program director for the Off-Broadway Origin Theatre Company. He spent 4 years as the Director of Performing Arts for the Cultural Department of the Royal Netherlands Embassy and Consulates in the US, and currently teaches as the adjunct professor at CUNY Brooklyn Colleges, teaching in the MVA Performance and Interactive Media Arts Program, also known as PIMA. He is a member of the Theatre Without Borders, Georgetown University's Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics, and the Netherlands America Foundation Cultural Committee. He serves on the Artistic Advisory Board of the Issue Project Room and Decades Out, an organization at the intersection of arts, science, and policy. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Erwin Maas a warm welcome. As you can read in your booklets, the topic here tonight is establishing a conducive environment to enhance the creative industry. I think the key and imperative terms here are establishing a conducive environment. And I think the analogy that we're going to use here is that good seeds don't grow in bad soil, right? You can have the best seed, but if that soil is not fertilized, if it's not watered, if it's not de-weeded, it's not going to grow. So we want to understand the soil within you as the artist function within. So the topic is, again, establishing a conducive environment to enhance the creative industry. Now, George, let's start with you. Talk to the topic in terms of what does the term conducive environment mean, especially within the East African context?
Hi, guys. My name is Gachara. I'm quite happy to be here. This is my first time to Namibia. Even before I introduce you to East Africa, I love stories. I I respect contexts. My work is around establishing and working with contexts. And so I've been trying to figure out what is the unique Namibian quirkiness. I still haven't found it. I have a few more days to go. But so far, I have a short list. First is the Black Panther-inspired Himba. There you go, Himba. I haven't seen any of that yet. There's someone who told me over dinner that your uniqueness is the 4-click sounds. Exactly, that. Okay, I'll tell you about the rest of the two as soon as I introduce East Africa. East Africa is also a context-heavy space. I work with a private investment fund that looks at creative industries, but also from the context in which they exist. And so Kenya, our unique idiosyncrasy is that we are a market economy, very competitive, such a hectic space, but some of you love it. There's Rwanda, which is the closest example to Namibia, clean, very passive-aggressive people, beautiful people as well, high trust society, but also people who love dignity. When you think about Tanzania, it's a rich culture, very undisturbed, high trust society. When you think about Ethiopia, we have a country that's in deep existential crisis of identity that's looking outward to define itself right now. And so those are the deep cultural contexts in which we put our investments in creative industries. Yes, Uganda. Uganda is a country that really, really appreciates its local artistic scene. People who come out in numbers, they always fill stadiums when their local artists are performing, when their soccer teams are playing, when their book cafes are happening. It's the most unique cultural scene in the region. And so all these idiosyncrasies start to define, I guess, our investment perspectives. And so as we walk into East Africa, the landscape is obviously an SME landscape with very micro businesses, some of them looking to the East African context, but also interested in the export market. We are somewhere in between Nigeria and South Africa. South Africa is a very midwifed country, a lot of public financing, strong institutions, and academic input in the infrastructure. Nigeria is a purely entrepreneur-driven market with very little institutions, very few but very successful fast movers, and a wasteland of talent in the wake. Kenya is trying to chart its path in between those two models. So there's an outward-looking creative industry, but then there's also an interest in working within the East Africa market economy, which is an economy of 180 million people who all speak English and Swahili. Rwanda recently joined the English bandwagon. So it's a massive market with 5 cities and about 24 million adults whose household incomes are increasing. If you look at any report from Bloomberg, McKinsey to World Bank. And so there's a potential market of about 24 million consuming households that are eager and that are consuming local identity products like Daktari's shirt from one of our investees in Rwanda called Haute Basso. So you should check them out. Yesterday, if you check my Instagram, I was wearing a Rwandan designer called Motions, one of the best East African designers of male products. So I guess what I'm trying to explain is that investing in creative industries for us has to be very focused and very context-specific. And when you ask me the question of what is an enabling environment, maybe what a government would do, we have to find a framework of looking at it. And as far as HEVA is concerned and informed by our studies since 2013, we found a simple criteria of four issues. The first and major issue that we look at is a question of cost burden. The cost burden on the creative entrepreneur, how much money they have to invest, where do they get it, do they make it back, is it financially viable? If you look at the different value chains, we have to look at the cost burden on the creative producer. And I'll give probably more examples after the opening statement. The second issue that we look at is red tape, legals, and regulations, because a lot of our creative industries struggle in one way or another depending on the legal regimes or the regulations or just the institutional culture. I'll give you an example. In Kenya, for you to be a successful fashion designer, you must import fabrics because our local fashion cotton industries were killed by World Bank's import substitution policies of the 70s and 80s. And so for you to import fabric, let's say we have an active port and in 24 days you can get your shipment. But the problem is that you can never make the same collection with the same inputs as soon as you run out of the rolls that you've imported. And so consistency in terms of inputs is a big impediment to quality standards. And so there's several legal, regulation, and institutional culture issues to look at when you're thinking about the business environment. The third and critical for us is what we think are skill gaps and intellectual property. When you think about skill gaps, I know a lot of us have been talking about our inborn talents. Those are good, and from the creative industry, we think about them as predispositions. So you're born with a predisposition to music, or predisposition to a certain kind of aesthetic, whether it's visual or otherwise, but then you're not a master at the point of predisposition. And that also for an industry, you need a lot of skills in the demand side and also in the supply side. And so skill gaps help improve the product and therefore competitiveness. You'll realize that most of my references are very business school. In most art conversations, we are the enemy. But I'd like to tell you that maybe not. And finally, I think about markets. A lot of our thoughts around creative industries are always supply side, because most of the people who create policies have very limited interactions with the market, or they used to have interactions with the market, but by the time they climbed the social ladders in government to be able to become decision makers, by that fact, they've become isolated from the market, and so they only make supply-side decisions. But the question of markets is a question of opportunity. And so we think that you must prioritize identifying an opportunity, then creating a supply-side policy to meet that opportunity. I'll give you an example. Ethiopia is the world's third largest producer of raw leather. They have 3 million herds of cattle every year because of their cultural practices. They fast several times a year, and they slaughter a lot of sheep and cattle. Like they have 3 or 4 Christmases in a year in their calendar. It's quite fascinating. So that when people are talking about the leather opportunity in Ethiopia, they say you have abundant natural material. You should process this and export it and compete with India. But a lot of people do not know that leather prices at the international markets are already predetermined. And so you can only produce at a certain factory floor price value. And so for Ethiopia to produce at that global price value, they have to lower their minimum wage, they have to subsidize electricity, they have to do a lot of things to meet that price value. And so a lot of advisors have told Ethiopia that they have a leather opportunity, but I don't think they have a leather opportunity because the market is already skewed against them. What I actually think is that because they have a unique leather product, which is their sheep produces the softest top leather that's good for the tops of shoes and gloves, especially for high-end leather gloves for the European market. They should specialize only on producing that special leather, and the rest can be for domestic consumption. And so I think that there has to be a concerted effort in identifying an opportunity and then creating a backward public policy to meet that opportunity, because that way we shall make creative industry sense. And so that is my
opening statement.
Well,
I just want you guys to know that I've taken off my hat as the chairman and I'm back in my journalist feet, so it's going to be a little contentious in terms of some of the things that you say, so please expect anything your way. Michelle, let's look at you. 20 years experience over at BASA, and a lot of the times I think the conversation here has been very isolated between what are the public sector efforts that need to be made and what are the private sector efforts that need to be made, and it seems like these two are worlds apart in terms of the investment that needs to go in to create this enabling environment. You are at the intersection of these two. Talk to us about that intersection.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's been fantastic. It's been a wonderful day of learning, and I must say, even though there's so much sort of like skill, I feel like I absolutely know nothing here today. I've learned so much. But so Business and Arts South Africa is an organization that, to quote Sisonke Msimang, the author, it's constantly negotiating the tensions between the world as we want it to be and the world as it is. And what I mean by that is that we are constantly focusing on the two spaces of narrative and numbers. So I don't believe that there's a binary between narrative and numbers. And I think that maybe one of the challenges today is that there's been a conversation that has established a binary, that has said that narrative storytelling, intrinsic arts, is not in any way the same as the numbers, which is the economy. But I don't think that that's the case. I think it's a moving scale, and you can choose where you want to be on the scale. So my conversation today is about where we are on the scale with business. And I think Jenny was the person who spoke a little bit earlier. I need to get some water. 'n bietjie windpomp sherry of iets. Asseblief. Thank you. I think Jenny was talking about it earlier. She was talking about speaking in multiple languages. And at BASA, that is really what we do. So we're constantly dealing with the public sector, which is government, who are one of our major funders. We're dealing with the private sector, which is businesses, the corporate sector, the banks, the insurance companies, the SMEs, the list goes on and on. The food outsourcers, Nando's, etc. That's a different language altogether. And then, of course, we're working with the third sector, or civil society, which is the arts sector. And we as artists speak a very different language once again. And George hit on it when he said, well, I'm coming to you from the enemy, which is business. But it's not that at all. They're not the enemy. They just don't know how to speak our language, and we need to be able to speak theirs as well. So just to note very briefly, the research that we've done over the last 20 years has shown a very simple shift. Originally, and I have to position this within South Africa, so I do apologize if I'm sounding sort of very regional, but hopefully you can take it into your own kind of case and see how you expand that. But originally, businesses in South Africa started to fund the arts through corporate social investment. It was, as Jenny was saying earlier, it was often a guilt or a grudge fund, and they were doing it because they wanted to be seen to be doing good. Within 10 years of our research of that, they had shifted out of corporate social investment and into marketing, above-the-line marketing. And the reason that they'd done that was because corporate social investment was starting to be seen to be more important in spaces of housing, health, child welfare, etc. The challenge, of course, with marketing and business funding or marketing funding of the arts when it comes from business is that ostensibly what happens is when there's a global or economic crisis or shrink of any nature, which we saw in 2008 and we're seeing again certainly in South Africa at the moment, businesses shut down on the thing they think is the most unnecessary or the most unimportant, which is marketing. Actually, marketing is the most important. And indeed, what we should be seeing is businesses putting more money into marketing in a time like this. And without doubt, the arts is the space that they can do it in because it is not a cluttered environment and it is not an expensive environment. Now, I'm speaking as though I'm a business person, and I have to say that I started out as a terrible actress and an even worse singer. So actually, I do sit with my heart on that side, but I do want to just say, you know, I'm putting on my BASA cap at this moment. But what I wanted to just say was that what we saw and what we have seen now is this transversality. And someone asked it as a question, and we really need to be talking that question today, tomorrow, and Thursday, is how are we going to be more transversal? So we're not just talking about all the departments of government, we're also talking about the private sector, and we're talking about the third sector, civil society. How are we going to cross those boundaries? Now, can I carry on for a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I've got a couple of things. You don't mind?
Opening
You don't
statement.
mind?
Opening
Oh,
statement.
okay. Long opening statement, sorry. So what we discovered at BASA and what we thought about at BASA was originally what we were doing was trying to figure out how much money our business is spending on the arts. But anybody who knows a corporate knows that they are not in hell going to tell you how much they spend on the arts because it's the competitive nature of business. So that ABSA Bank is not going to tell us they spend 10 million rands when they know that if RMB hears that, RMB is going to say, well, how much do they spend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we thought we're not going to follow how much they spend. We're going to try and figure out where the money comes from. So let's follow the money. So we created this model called the shared value cycle. Now, anybody who works in business will know that shared value is and to explain to those of us who don't work in business, shared value is it's a philosophy or it's a theory that comes out of business that says if businesses do good in society, they can do good for their profits as well. That's like the basic line of it. Comes out of Kramer and Porter at Harvard University. So we thought, okay, let's have a look at this and let's see if businesses can do good in the arts sector through various different departments in their organization, then what that will mean is that they are funding the arts through their strategy and not just through their departments. And if it's an internal strategy, then it's far more crucial for them to engage in the arts. So instead of just saying, okay, we're going to give money to the arts through marketing, because that can be cut away, or we're going to give money through CSI, because that can be cut away, we need to start getting businesses to go through CSI and ESG, which is environment, society, and governance. Marketing, CSI, ESG, marketing, HR transformation and diversity, technology research and development, brand and product, cultural tourism and diplomacy, international cooperation, and broad-based Black economic empowerment. That is just some of the areas where businesses can and have, according to some of our models and some of our clients, funded the arts. So an example like Nando's, and I promote Nando's because Nando's really have strategically, as a fast food company, have strategically engaged in the arts as part of their strategy. And as Robbie Brosen will say, it's not a Kentucky Fried Chicken. You don't go to a Nando's, buy your food and charge out as quickly as you can. They've now changed the Nando's into a lifestyle emporium. So essentially what happens is you go and you sit down and you eat your chicken. So the chicken, they may not sell more chicken, and this is what Robbie Brosen says, but the chicken damn well tastes better. And that's because you're sitting in a beautiful space and the art is amazing. So Nando's have gone one step further. They now support artists all around the country, and that would be part of a CSI process, but they use it as a marketing environment for them to put artworks on all their walls. They now have they have a design capacity, a massive design capacity, where they have creatives and designers who create the lightworks, the chairs, the tables, etc., which are all over the world. So every single Nando's in the world has this product. So ostensibly what they've done is they've moved out of just marketing and they've shifted it into their internal strategy. Okay? So what's happened is you've created an equitable partnership. And that's the conversation that we should be talking about today, which is about partnership and collaboration. Okay. So
2 minutes.
2 minutes, all right. I'm going to hold what we can be teaching to creator skills development, because I know you're going to ask the question, but I'm just going to say this. What do businesses feel that they need as we move forward? Okay. They want to see a kind of blended finance from arts organizations. They want to see impact investment, which George can talk to completely. They want to see organizations that can offer them arts-based initiatives and arts-based intelligence. So they want to learn from artists certain skills within their own space. HR, humanities, transformation, diversity. We know of an equities company that had artists paint every single person in the company, and they put it up on the wall. And the reason that they did that was not just because they wanted art on the wall, but they wanted their staff to talk to one another, to discover one another through what they saw. I see George like this, but when I see George on the big screen, I'm like, oh my God, he looks like Idris Elba. And then I go and I tell him, and our entire relationship changes in the organization. Suddenly, he doesn't see me as this white woman who's just like hucking on. He sees me as someone, ooh, yeah. And that's really how these things work. They're small, they're intimate, but they break down the boundaries and the borders. So businesses want to see that. They want to see arts-based initiatives. They want to see impact investment. I said that. Social investors now require impact, sustainability, and return on investment. You know that. Now, this is important. They want to see personal investment, both time and financial. Very, very few businesses are going in to fund a project that hasn't been tested, tried, iterated, failed, had the artist's own money put into it, basically design thinking all the way. They want to see that you've put your time, your money, your passion, and your perseverance into it. Otherwise, they're not going to go that route. They want to see measurement. As much as we hate measurement, they want to see it. And it is difficult. And we should come out of this 2 days with trying to figure out how we put a value to intrinsic values and how we put a measurement on that. It's really, really tough. And they want to see, I think you mentioned earlier, technology as a tool. Interestingly, businesses really want to see you using technology as a tool. They're interested in that process. They want to see your innovation. And they want to partner with you. And they want to learn with you and become a partnership that is equitable, as I mentioned. So they're not the enemy. And we shouldn't be seeing them as such. But we need to go in there knowing that everything we have to offer is as good as their money, if not better.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Erwin, obviously, long flight from New York. Thank you for being here. It's interesting because we've worked in the development context, but you've also started an initiative that focuses on giving artists on the continent an opportunity to not just access local markets or regional markets, but also the global value chain markets when it comes to the cultural and creative industries. What are some of the key things that have worked that have not worked in either of the contexts in your experience?
Yes, thank you. Also, thank you to the Namibian Arts Council for being here. It's really very exciting. It's my first time in Namibia, so it's really fantastic. And I just want to bring back very quickly, Rosemary, what you said about the book learning. That really participates, or that is for me, because I'm very much a practitioner. I have never really been very book smart. I come from theatre. I'm a theatre maker. Coming from the Netherlands, a country that is almost entirely below sea level, we needed to swim before we could read. So practice is really where I come from, but then all of a sudden I found myself in the diplomacy world, being a cultural officer at the embassy. And so all of a sudden I had to step with one leg in that world and with one leg at the other. And one thing that I would say in regards to your question is that with all the stuff that I've seen on global level, but also on a Dutch level, or now working in Africa more, is that whenever it's been focused from top down, it first of all takes enormously long to get anything done. And whenever something is grassroots up and really coming from the artists, obviously this is like a no-brainer. All of a sudden things happen really quickly. And therefore, I would like to share some really practical opportunities for the artists in the room. We've been talking a lot to the policymakers. But what I'm so excited about in this room is, and actually for this summit, which is really remarkable, is the fact of the diversity in the room within the arts. Because a lot of international summits that I've been to, it's either the policymakers and the funders talking together, the field talking together, meaning artistic directors, general managers, and the artists talking together, all separately from each other. So it's really exciting to see everybody in the room here, and that's why I wanted to talk about some opportunities or platforms, because really in the end, when you talk about an conducive environment for the creative arts to sustain, it's about access, it's about accessibility, and it's about platforms that work for artists and not necessarily for the policymakers. So in 2015, and it was alluded to earlier today, there was a UNESCO and United Nations report of the creative output, the global creative output, and indeed from Africa it was 1% or less. And we were in South Africa, in Bloemfontein, at this festival. Dr. Ricardo Peach is here, who's the artistic director of the festival. And we were talking with artists from the townships, from the city, CEOs of companies. Rosemary was there as well, the CEO of the National Arts Council. And basically, we put out that question on the table, what can be done? And the artist said, we need a platform. We need a platform where we can showcase what we can do. And that is where PACE was born, the Pan-African Creative Exchange. And I just want to briefly talk about this because this is really very valuable for the artists in the room. This is a practical opportunity for you to showcase your work, because it's open to spoken artists, it's open to the performing arts, the visual arts. We hope to open it up in the future also more to film and food, but it's right now very performing arts driven. And what PACE is, it is a gathering of artists, presenters, festival directors. It is also open to academia and policymakers, but in the first place, it's a meeting place for artists from the continent. So any artist from the African continent can apply, and then there's a committee that looks at the work, and this is Hope Azeda from the Kigali Festival, or Ismail Mohammed from the Market Theatre, are just a few to name, but they look at the work and then people are selected to come and present. It is in 3 strands. You can either submit tour-ready work, or as a visual artist, just completed work, work in progress, or pitch. And that could be an idea that you're just looking for a funder, or you're looking for a partner, for a collaborator. This year was the first time we had PACE in Bloemfontein, South Africa, in July. It's going to be biannual, so every 2 years. The next PACE will be in 2020, and the call for work will go out next year. So this is really a practical platform for artists to showcase their work to the people on the continent as well as people from outside the continent. This year there were people from several European countries, America, Brazil, Australia, Singapore, and already several artists, and this is only a month ago, but already several artists have been invited to tour to some of those countries. But more importantly, I have to share the opening night. Assanam Kiki from South Africa was singing, and Abdoulaye Diallo from Senegal is a dancer, and she was singing, and he was so inspired. And this is what happens when artists meet together. Because he was so inspired what she was singing that he jumped on the stage and he started dancing, and she started kind of riffing off his dance. She completely not forgot her song, but she changed her song, and they started creating something together. Now he invited her to come to Senegal. She invited him to come to South Africa to do a project together. Ismail from the Market Theatre has invited people from Egypt to come and work in Johannesburg, and the Lagos Fringe Festival has invited artists that he saw at PACE to come to the Lagos Fringe Festival. This is really what PACE is trying to be. Yes, it is very exciting if you can be represented in Europe or in New York or in Singapore, but for us, the value even is more in the mobility on the continent. So that's what PACE is about. And then very quickly, and you can ask me questions more about it afterwards, but very quickly, some more global platforms that are really interesting to look at. As you heard, I'm the Artistic Creative Director of ISPA, which is the International Society for Performing Arts. It's the largest network of performing arts practitioners. It is really focused more on festival directors, general managers, venue owners, really the field. But they have a fantastic global fellowship program. And if you go to ispa.org, you can look up the fellowship program because it's open to anybody. And basically, if you're selected, it is a very strict selection because the whole world applies. But if you're selected, you are a fellow for a year. They meet every year in January in New York. It is an incredible network to get introduced to, and every year in June somewhere else in the world. It has been in Durban quite a long time ago. The next time it will be in Guadalajara in Mexico. So that's ISPA. Some people that I know, if she's still here, she was there last year, the ASSA2018 organization. ASSA2018 organization is the world organization for theater or for performing arts, not only theater, performing arts for young audiences. They have what they call the Next Generation program. Again, you can apply for the Next Generation program. Obviously, this is really only for those practitioners that are focused on creating work for children or for youth. They then invite you to come and you'll get a whole workshop and a whole session to connect to some of your fellow practitioners around the world. Their next global meeting is in 2020 in Tokyo, Japan. And the last one that I will say is the European Cultural Foundation. And I understand that that sounds a little weird for a European and a Eurocentric, but actually they have a fantastic global leadership, young global leadership program that again is a phenomenal opportunity for people from all over the world to apply to. Again, this is more focused on people, on young entrepreneurs in festival, in the performing arts, in the visual arts, to apply to and get connected with your peers. Because in the end, I think it is very important to look regionally, but obviously we all know you learn so much about your own country, about your own region when you actually leave it, when you actually go away from it. And so often I have seen, I mean, this was then for Dutch people that came to New York on a conference, and they live 10 minutes away from each other. They've never collaborated. And yet, when they saw each other in New York, and that's where all of a sudden a lot of collaboration started to happen, and they went back and created work together. So this happens a lot. We saw this happening at PACE actually also for some of the people that came from Zimbabwe and from South Africa themselves. So I think that's kind of like the, I wanted to throw out some practical tools or some practical opportunities for the artists in the room to really look at how can I get outside and learn more.
That's interesting because you're also identifying the nature of art in not actually being nationalistic or defined by the borders that do exist, and how people are actually connecting on more of a human level and then come back into their states. I think that's an important point. I'm going to ask one more question to George, and I'm going to open up the floor to everybody. So please be ready with your questions. George, I think in terms of investment and enhancing the impact of the creative economy, I find sometimes, and I don't know, maybe you can talk to us since you deal with a lot of these grassroots artists who, when we're talking about this bottom-up, it happens. Sometimes I find that artists don't grow because they're not handling the business of art. So when Michelle sits there and Michelle says, we need blended financing, we need to understand impact investment, we need personal investment. I just want to paint. I just want to dance. So do we put an unfair burden on the artists, or can we inculcate those various skills that you're talking about within the artists, or do we need to have a blended model of teaching them, but also letting them, have support services like HEVA yourself, where you're looking at almost like a management consulting as well as financing? What modality works within our context? Is it unfair to place that burden on the artist to know the business side of art, and does it take away from the creative process in terms of the quality that we have to produce? What's your experience?
Well, this is like a 101 course on cultural enterprise. So this is when you remove your notebooks. And, well, this is the thing. As soon as you enter the frame of cultural enterprise, there are few thoughts that you must have, you have to grapple with. The first thing is the artist and the artistic office. Most times they see themselves as one. So you are the artist and your office is your authentic profession. But as a cultural entrepreneur, there has to be a distance between you and your office. So a cultural entrepreneur looks at the output as a business that has his input. And so he can cost his hours, he can cost the inputs, so that then he knows the precise value he's creating in order to share it on a discount or to sell it. Because for cultural enterprises, there has to be a till. For art, you really don't need a till. Your till can be blessings, identity, love in your community, all this magical realism universe that we exist in. And that's beautiful and must continue to be that. But as soon as you enter the world of creative enterprise, then you realize that your artistic practice needs new offices. And so for us as HEVA, we insist on a team, because we realize that it is unfortunate to require the dentist to also be an accountant and to be also the nurse. And so why should we require the artist to also become the front office? And so in the design of our financial facilities, especially the early stage financial facilities for young creative entrepreneurs, we design it such that you have at least had a creative product and you've traded with it for at least a year, which means you've iterated and you're seeing yourself as a person who's ready to sell. The identity crisis has already happened. That you have a team of at least 3 people on permanent basis, that they work with you every day.
But I think there's an element when you use an example of a doctor or a dentist, there's prestige in those fields, especially in our context, so it's easier to then get the assistance. But are you saying that we need to bring prestige back into the arts then, or have as your company identified that gap to say that actually art is prestigious? How do we then align that?
So I have not met a fashion designer who doesn't have prestige. But I've met a lot of artists who can be fashion designers, but they feel really low about the office of the artist. And so I feel as soon as you start to practice in the market, the internal challenges continue, but then you project them onto the world, or you make people pay for those issues. I'm not only speaking as a financer for the arts. I'm a filmmaker and a writer. I'll give you my example. I moved out from my mother's house in 2005 because I wrote a book. And I thought that this book would give me some earnings continuously to sustain my life outside of my mother's house. I published it with Author House in the UK. I paid some money for distribution. And after the first check of $6,000 that I was able to get out of the house, the rest of the checks that I've received since then have never been worth the amount of the paper. And so if you come to my living room, there's a whole notice board with little checks that have been posted since 2005. And so I realized the artistic struggle to create a till, to generate value, to sell it, and also to get an artistic livelihood out of your creation. But then, as soon as you enter creative enterprise, then you have to build your business capacity, whether through a team or retooling yourself, accepting to go back to school and getting some technical capacity to be able to create competitively and to harvest value. A lot of us as artists, again, we create value and then we do not put a till and then we distribute it without knowing when to harvest it. The first thing I learned in business school, that as soon as you have a sales department, you have to have a revenue department that has to work as hard as the sales department. And that's what we've tried to help all our investment portfolios, from young businesses that we give $10,000 until they mature to get $100,000, that they have to learn cultural ways in which they can harvest this value. And that's then we start to build small businesses that have some sort of revenue. So we have to shift the landscape and say that if you're operating as a business, then you need to have some business capacities that secure the value that you're creating, whether it's a cultural good or service or an experience. But there has to be a team.
But generally, where should that be placed? We get that, but where should it be placed? Should it be placed within the artist, like you're talking about the office, or should we outsource that?
Well, as far as the theory of the of HEVA Fund is concerned, we think that there has to be a core team that drives a creative product. And this core team at the beginning might not be paid cash value by the startup, but they can be paid in shares. They can be paid in other ways, equity, and eventually, if you scale your business to medium size, then these people become core team who can participate in the earnings of a business. So they pay forward. They give a discount to the business at the beginning. And so there has to be a new curriculum of looking at creative enterprises as a new competence to be able to move products. And for us, we do not expect all value chains or all subsectors to assume that model. When we began in 2013, we had 5 value chains that we had considered as investable. We're looking at fashion, we're looking at music, we're looking at interior design and crafts, we're looking at photography and digital media, we're looking at natural hair products, cosmetics, and lifestyle value chains. But now, informed by our history of investment, we're focusing on 4 value chains. And these 4 value chains have have substantially grown. If you think about live music performance and live music and music recording, if you think about film, television, and digital distribution, when you think about fashion, retail, and manufacturing, and gaming, those are the spaces that we feel that are ready for investment. And what happens, these investment value chains that we are looking at, we do not intend for them to take over the entire creative industry, but the very nature of their production value chain, they involve a lot of artistic inputs. And so you can be a creative photographer, but 2 days in a month or a week, you are part of a creative production that's facing an advertiser, so that you supplement your income. But the rest of the time, you create work that is inspired by the general aesthetic that we call African magical realism, this space that we exist. So I feel that we need to start to create a curriculum that understands the places that we are, and to also understand that capital only flows to places that there is some sort of order, and some place and containers that when you give them 5 talents, They can give you 5.5, they can give you 6, or at least the same 5.
Okay.
Yes.
Michelle, you wanted to say something, but also just to add on another component, how do artists value their art when you're actually, how do you, when you do those negotiations, say that's worth that much? What are some of the key factors also?
Okay, I'm going to have to put that into my head and sort of turn it around for a moment, but I just want to jump onto this. You know, I think if we're going to talk about a sector that is fit for purpose, and we're talking about the creative sector here, we need to understand that there really is a differentiation between an entrepreneur and someone who cannot be an entrepreneur. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur, and it's extremely unfair to assume that everybody is going to go the route of entrepreneurship or cultural entrepreneurship, which is about scalability. Then, of course, there is sustainability, and that is something that many other artists work, and a space that many other artists work in. So we need to differentiate between those spaces, because the learnings, you're quite right, that you have to get for entrepreneurship are very different to the learnings that you need for sustainability. And one of the things that we discovered over our skills development programs was exactly that, was that we kept pushing towards this business planning, entrepreneurship, et cetera, and actually some of the areas that we should have been working in was what was mentioned this morning, asset-based community development. We should definitely be working in assets within community. We should be looking at scarcity thinking. We should be looking at stretch collaboration, emotional and cultural intelligence. It's funny that we have all these doctors in the room, but I'll bet you these doctors will give us a whole lot more emotional intelligence than a real doctor will give us. I mean, I've been with a real doctor where my arm was broken and I had to negotiate for emotional intelligence and empathy. He didn't know how to give it to me because he was a doctor of just that part of my arm. So, frankly, I would rather go to the doctors here next time I have an arm issue. But also, I think we need to think about things, we do need to think about things like design thinking. I mean, this issue of testing, trying, it's not just the thing for business. It's also the thing for us as artists. How do we think about empathizing, defining, ideating? And lastly, you know, there's been a big conversation today about natural-born talent. So I think that natural-born talent and saying that we all have natural-born talent is an unconscious bias. And I actually don't think it's completely true. And I think that whilst we might have talent, the interest that we should rather have is in that interesting concept of grit, which is the Angela, what's her name, Duxworthy concept. Yeah. Because what she says is, she says talent times effort equals skill. Skill times effort equals achievement. So that's the mathematical equation. Talent on its own gets nowhere. And we really need to be teaching our artists that it's not good enough to just have talent. The person who goes talent times effort and works at it then gets the skill times the effort again, then gets the achievement. And I think as artists, we need to go back to that process once again.
Value of art, how do you value, George? How do you value it? Maybe just before I open the floor.
This is the thing. I have several mentors because this work is ridiculously difficult. And I used to ask them, why am I so tired always? Like, why am I so tired? And they told me that success feels like work. Like whenever you achieve something, the feeling is not anything on a Coke or Sprite ad. You know, it's work. And nowadays I've sat with that feeling and I've accepted it so deeply that I look for it. I'm like, I need to feel tired. Maybe I need to get there. And so obviously because it's a nascent sector, there are a lot of people that the infrastructure of taking off. You have to build the infrastructure, you have to build the trust, you have to build the market, and only then can you harvest value. So I'm just emphasizing that
How do you value art, George?
How do you value art?
Time.
You can't. How does
practical sense, if you
does
produce the
HEVA value art, not George?
Well, how do people, as an artist, what are the key components that you need to take into considering the value of your art?
if someone wants to buy it.
Okay.
But that's a different kind of value. That's an economic value. I don't buy art because I know I'm going to expand on its value over the years. I buy art because I really want to see it on the back of my wall.
Okay.
So other people do it differently.
I'll give you an example. I'm wearing a shirt, and this shirt has been made by a Kenyan. And every time I used to go to a public forum, I'd have this problem. I mean, I'm talking about creative industries. I can't wear Turkish stuff. I have to wear a Kenyan shirt or an East African shirt. It's because of identity, pride, magical realism. However, it cost me so much money to get a locally designed shirt. It's so cumbersome to find these guys whose tailor disappeared or the fabric didn't arrive at the port. So it's so much work for me to commit to my value system. But then if it's high quality, it's worth the effort. And the value for creative products, unfortunately, because some of them go to people directly, it's how people feel about them. What stories people are able to tell when they experience the product, because cultural products sit with you at home. They are your house, your interiors. They're the stuff next to your skin. It's the stuff you're watching in your free time. It's the toys you're giving to your children. It's the stuff you read to your children as they go to sleep. That's creative industries. That's the real value. And so if it doesn't have value, if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't taste right, if it doesn't rub on your skin very well, it doesn't have value, and you never return to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Erwin?
I just quickly wanted to add to that, because I think indeed today I heard also a lot, because of the comments that I heard a lot today, there seems to be like there is one specific way, or there's one specific artist or one specific policymaker, but not everybody is a Picasso or a John Carney. You're an artist, but you have an incredible business skill, and you decided to create this opportunity for yourself. So I think it is really important to realize that not only do we as artists need people from a business skill, and maybe not ourselves, we collaborate with somebody else, but it's also the opposite way. I mean, look at yourself in the position that you're in. We need more artists in those positions. We need more artists in policy-making positions. But that also means we as artists need to take our responsibility. Because when I asked the Dutch field, when they were all complaining when the cuts happened, I said, who is going to take responsibility to sit 4 years in the Ministry of Culture? And then all of a sudden, nobody wants to do that. So I really think we need to look on both sides of the aisle. It's not an either or, it's an and situation. And I think that's what's so beautiful here also. Unfortunately, the economic word is bigger than the other one. I wish they were equally big. But really, it is. We've talked a lot about numbers today, and I think it is incredibly important. Absolutely, we need to have that backup. But the intrinsic value of the arts and culture are not in the numbers. The intrinsic value are somewhere else, and we need to create that narrative to make that clear. And it makes me think of that picture that was so prominent on social media not too long ago of the two figures standing on the number 6 or 9, depending how you looked at it. And the one said, just because one said it's a 6, and the other one said it's a 9, and then it said underneath, just because you are right doesn't mean that I am wrong. You just haven't seen life from my side. And Octavio Paz is saying in his essays on arts and culture, it is the experience of the other that is the secret to change. And I think that's where the value of arts and culture lies, is that we can experience the other. And that's how we are going to change as a society.
And is that where the unique part fits in? Let's open up the floor.
Basically, I just wanted to share a little bit. I studied at AVDA in Cape Town last year, and I was applying to do a few internships. And a lot of the times, it would end up being unsuccessful because, for example, I didn't have a car, or, for example, I didn't have a MacBook. Now, to return... Now, to return to what you were saying, Michelle, about businesses wanting to see, they want to see impact, personal investment, which is your time and your money. As an artist, you don't necessarily have the time because you've got your day job. You don't necessarily have the money. So how can I still show my value to a business, to someone that's kind of business-minded, without any of that?
To the design thinking aspect, I am also a design strategist that sometimes pays the bills, depending on which country I'm in. So I've worked on 2 projects, which in a design thinking capacity. It's how to teach teachers, how to empower teachers to teach design thinking to children who are going into an economy that is so volatile, and to teach critical thinking and the importance of failure. And the second one was boxing and autism, and how to empower an autistic child to be the best version of themselves through boxing. So I worked with MMA fighters, boxers, trainers, musicians, DJs, all kinds of people that you work with as a design thinker, right? What I find is that when I'm in Botswana versus South Africa, well, that's the other country, it's very different. Because in South Africa, I'm sitting there with my mentor who gives me the space to be creative. It's a white male who does yoga and people love him or whatever, right? My mentor. So there's that. And then when I go into a space in my country, I'm a young black female who thinks she knows everything, right? So that is the reality, and that's not going to stop anything. But how do I communicate design thinking as a tool versus, it's a human-centered approach to solve corporate and social solutions? Because you walk into a bank and say that, okay, let's start internally. What does a Stanbic bank look like internally? How do we create how do we journey the people who work in your company on a daily basis? What is the user journey from the car park to the office? What is the experience of this place? It's like, okay, that's really cool. Thank you very much. No, we'll do monkey surveys and then we'll call you, because they don't understand the language. So I don't know if the terms are too large, or if I'm assuming everyone kind of understands what design thinking is, and I'm being complex in thinking I'm being simplistic. So how do I navigate that space without sounding like I think I know everything?
I run a social enterprise in Uganda. It's called Wazi Vision, and basically we recycle plastic and make affordable eyewear, especially for communities that are underserved. What I have had, so I work a lot with artists and creative people to come up with the designs that we actually use for our glasses. And one of the biggest challenges I have found is I feel like sometimes artists do things at their own time, at their own pace, how they like and what they like, okay? For me, as an entrepreneur, I have deadlines. We know that we need to mold this thing in 2 weeks. And the people that I've worked with, they don't get that. They're like, it's my talent. That's how I do my thing. I don't want, it's
ownership.
You understand? So I don't know how to reconcile the two. I don't know if I should talk to them in a different way. And believe me, not even money motivates them. So the problem is not money. You will give them a lot of money and they'll still send you work 10 months late. And you cannot wait, because at the end of the day, business needs to move on. So how do we get creatives to understand that it's not just their talent, it's not just what they do well, but it's also money. And if there are going to be synergies between artists and business people, we all have to be responsible for the work that we do, and we have to have the correct work ethic and attitude towards this kind of synergies. How do we get that?
Michelle, I'm quite happy that you brought up how we can interact with banks and so on better, and not just from corporate responsibility, because I don't really think that's a sustainable thing for the future. But I'd like to know, as a practitioner and somebody who's in civil society, specifically for my industry, which is film, which affects like nearly everybody pretty much in Namibia when it comes to the arts, because we need creatives to work with us to make movies. Okay, let me put it this way. Does BASA have some kind of resource in terms of how to write proposals, how to approach banks and larger private sector businesses, because in Namibia, many of these multinational companies are actually based in South Africa. So whenever you talk to the PR person or the marketing person, they're like, we'll get back to you after we've heard from Johannesburg. So, I think it's something that maybe BASA could also have a look at, because as Namibians, that's like a major gatekeeper for us. So if there's some kind of resource or proposal help that we could get from BASA to speak to Standard Bank, FNB, and so on, to sort of surpass Namibia's gatekeeping. Thanks.
Being a public servant, yeah, I want to know whose responsibility is it to pay for a painter who wants to paint but has to live? I want to know, how do we work around that? Because we need to strike some sort of balance. I believe in sustainability and working out sustainable methods.
First, before I ask you a question, don't do any mistake by saying there's not artist who can become what you call administrator. I was one of the administrators until the government take me off. And I did well in this country with John Mafangeo Art Center and with the basket and pottery making for the northern part that was selling very nicely, where I implemented fair trade. You see? And then bringing the glass project where we recycle glass and make some jugs out of glass. And I'm an artist. Don't make a mistake. It is not about administrators. None of you were administrators. None of you. You were born like me. We are not even, none of you knows how it means to be talented. And I want to ask a question to Madame in the middle. Two questions. You have a question, you say skills and talent. I want you to tell me, which one is first? Is it the talent or the gift? The second one, creative and idea. Which is first? Is it the creativity or the idea? Why I'm saying that, I'm not just an artist, I'm a spiritualist. And I understand that we don't here think about spiritual people. For me, when I look at idea, for me it's the first thing before I create. I have to have an idea in my mind. And creativity comes to me afterward. And when it comes to skills and talent, when I started to become an artist, I had to go to my late grandmother and ask her who I am when I was a small child. And when she told me, I was drawing at the ground, making house with sand, making wire cars. I don't know if it's that skills or that's my talent. So it's only what I'm trying to see is that the words sometimes we use is what we don't understand what they mean at the end. Maybe words also make us, I'm not Doromakar, maybe. There is one thing, the last one, is the word of marketing. I'm one of the artists that I marketed myself in this country, not asking anything from the government. Travel the whole world, just like a minister and a president, without the assistance of them. See the world and hear from the people. But one thing that made me to be where I am today is because I didn't sleep all the time in the hotels. I sleep in the communities, in Småland, in Russia, St. Petersburg, in the people's houses, to learn their thinking and their cultures. So, what I want to say, Uncle Sam.
Time.
I thank you, time. And because Africa don't have time, the sunset is to sleep. Madam, you are right in the way you are speaking it. And I think my brother who said 9 and 6. You are right the way you said that artists must think the talent is not the inborn. For you, you are right. For me, it's right that when I'm an inborn, that's my talent. Because I see it from not having end up to the University of Art or end up to the University College of Art, and I've made it more than those who went to your universities and study and make music without any, I was not educated to make music. I was not at the college. I was not at the visual art college to make visual. So what did happen is that I just awakened in my spirit that God have given me Normally, it was destroyed by the boundary education because they wanted me to learn how to read. And they forget that I was a gifted child that can only create. Think about those who are just create, not to think of school.
Papa, let me ask you a question. How many artists do you think function within that space in our context, or whether it's in Namibia, whether in SADC? How many artists come from and can tell their narrative like you're telling it out of a spiritual place? Sometimes is art an escape for people who aren't gifted?
You see, there's two things, again, as I started. There's the alien culture of the society, looking at the society. If I don't do this, they think I'm bad.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we have created as all of us, not only white and black, all of us as human, we are all living in an alien culture that make us to believe what they have brought to you, that you can only do this, then you become somebody, is what have now made this. To me, I don't know how many artists are like me, because as I tell you, I'm just me, spiritual me. So maybe there's other artists who are there, and that's why I said by birth, nobody was an administrator. So there's many other people, even here. There's people who are artists, but because they was not activated, they think they are not because they were enslaved to believe they must be in the office and doing things that they are not happy with. You understand? So, not corruption. So, what I want to say is that
Now, I want to distinguish whether you're speaking on your own behalf or on the behalf of artists in general.
now I was telling you my experience, me, because that's the mistake we do. I cannot speak to his experience. That's what we do. I speak from me what I've done, so that I cannot be blamed by somebody and I say them, then they say, I don't do that. So I'm speaking to me. That's why we must try not to speak for other people when you are not the one. That's what I'm trying to say. And I go to my sister from Uganda. Sorry to come in to you. My sister from Uganda.
Brenda.
If I know to greet you. Masema. What do they say in Swahili language? I wanted to greet you in that way, but it's fine, I don't know. I want to say something, Kidoko. It is not the generation that is like my generation. This is the people they can tell you. Artists, if you give me a job, tomorrow morning you'll have it. You must tell us, it depends from which generation are we living today. We have a lazy generation today. My sister from Angola have mentioned it, laziness. And by the way, that's my name, Dasunye, means lazy. So, it is not about that we are lazy people or we cannot do the job. It's about the generation that we are living today in that looks at the time. When it's lunchtime, I can go out of this office. When it's 5 o'clock, that's the generation. We don't have time. You see? So you must now try and find how do you bring the old generation just into there to show the young generation that time does not exist in me. I don't have time. I don't know time. So the artists can do your job if you ask us. Maybe you ask the wrong artist who will not worry about bringing bread to the table or not maybe have the passion, because sometimes it's a passion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that's the final remark. Panelists, you get to address the questions and also give your closing remarks. Erwin, from any of those questions, take some of them on. I think maybe the ideas around how to empower teaching.
Well, I mean, the question about whose responsibility to pay for the artist, that's of course not an easy answer or a one-side answer. I think in the end, of course, we all want to live in a society where all the arts are funded tremendously. I can only mention to you what happened in my country when there was barely any funding for the arts, and we literally had, it's in the history books, in 1969 we had a tomato revolt, where students from the Theatre Academy started throwing tomatoes to the Shakespeare play in the theatre in Amsterdam because they were so unhappy with what was created on the stages and that there was no funding for the younger generation. And that was the start of our cultural funding in the Netherlands. So in the end, I think it's all about also looking at, as a society, how do we as a society value the arts? So because I don't think we can just point to one certain direction and that's the person or the organization that should pay. So that's a little bit of a tricky question. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I think that's the only answer I can give from this perspective.
Closing remarks?
Well, I think I kind of said it already. I think one of the things is, I love what is said. I'll bring it back again to where, for me, the strength of the arts is that the arts bring this knowledge of where we can experience the other, where we can look somebody in the eye or listen to somebody and we can experience them. That's the intrinsic value. I think what our problem is on a bigger societal level, and this is again where incredible value of arts lies, is that you, sir, you mentioned this morning that it's, what was it, humanity? I would say it's humanity, that we live in a society of management. And that's where I again look at you also, Patrick, how fantastic it is to have people like you in these positions, because we've become to live in a society that is a management society, not just in the arts, not just in politics. Our Minister of Agriculture can become the Minister of Education in 4 years. It makes no sense. 40 years ago, a Minister of Education had been a teacher, or a Minister of Agriculture had been a farmer. And so we've become so far away from what we actually represent. And
What
you
do we
see it
represent?
Sorry?
What do we represent?
It is our humanity.
Okay.
And I think in that sense is if you come from that field, whatever that field is that you represent, that's where you can look somebody in the eye and say, I see you, I understand you, and that's why I can advocate for you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause to Erwin Maas. Michelle, you have quite a mouthful.
Sure.
4 minutes.
I'll start with Pinguela. Pingan, apologies, the filmmaker. Unfortunately, BASA is not working in the film sector, and it's because we're mandated not to because of the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa. So we are not able to enter into that space because it crosses into another funding body space. But I will say that I think, was it Florence who said it earlier about the book? Like, who's going to read the book and who's going to read the summary? So I think you need to get down to the summary faster than you get to the book. Certainly in all our funding and sponsorship applications, the shorter, not too short, but obviously the shorter the better. And it also shows that you understand what your project is. Esther, also a filmmaker, saying artists don't have time, how can I show my value? And in fact, time, as Papa said, time is the issue. And in fact, you have to be able to prove that you are going to give it your time. So you cannot go to, well, you can, but I haven't seen it work, where someone goes to a business and says, I've just got this idea. But where they've gone to business and they've tested it in their own time, then we've seen it work a lot better. I mean, the people who literally in their own time put on a festival for the first year, and because they can then go back the next year and show a business how it worked, they are then able to demonstrate who the market is, who the audience is, etc. Design thinking, I'm sure George can answer that question, but just design thinking is just a term, and it's a term of a process. So you really are teaching a process which is about starting with an idea, and I agree with Papa, I think the idea comes before the creativity, or round about at the same time. So you have to simplify it down to what is the process. You're not teaching them this word or this term. You're teaching them a process, or you're working on a process. I just want to say we always think of boxing as a great form of example for the arts, because it demonstrates agility and resilience. Because if you think of Muhammad Ali in the great rope-a-dope fight, probably one of the greatest fights of all time, that was the perfect example of agility and resilience. And what was it? He took the punches. He just kept taking the punches. That was the resilience. Leaned against the ropes, took the punches, took the punches, took the punches. And then at the last minute, he came back with that fantastic, I think it was a southpaw, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. And he came back with that. And that was the agility. And I think that we have to think about those spaces. And finally, I suppose a comment to Papa is that I agree that the arts are a spiritual space. I believe that personally. And I believe that when I look at art, and this would be my closing statement, when I see art that moves me enough to make me want to cry, to make me want to get into a conversation with someone, to make me rage, to make me debate, to make me feel sickened by my own privilege, then I believe that is great spiritual art. But that's me. So how everybody else sees art or envisions art is their own choice. So Papa, I do believe that it's a spiritual thing, and I think you're right. And I think talent is absolutely crucial. You can't do it without talent, but you also can't do it without hard work either.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Constance. You're done. You can go home now. George.
I have exactly 3 thoughts.
We have exactly one basket.
Yes.
Yeah.
Esther and design thinking. I think the lady who spoke about design thinking, you have been taught a methodology by a good university, but you don't have a product. What you're struggling with would be improved if you learned about selling, about packaging. You can offer bespoke services. So think about going to school to learn about selling and developing a product. Then now you can be able to sell something. The question of showing value, and especially from an investor's perspective, as HEVA, we've developed a practice that looks at any data that your trading history has generated. In Kenya, we have a mobile phone technology that can give you M-Pesa records. You can give us your little cash book. We reconstruct your history 3 years back to make a story of your investment capability in the present. So you don't have to demonstrate in the future, but then we can work with you to reconstruct your investment history. And then we create a financial model based on your investment history, so then we can give you a tailored solution. My closing statements is that...
Before you get there, can I just interrupt?
Yes.
Can you talk to us about your latest web series project also, in terms of how you allowed the public to participate to kind of get that mobilization around your products in closing?
Well, so that's my 4th point. Other than running a private investment fund, I'm part of an arts collective. And as part of the arts collective, one of our medium is film, and that we've explored in numerous film genres. And our recent project, actually the second last project we did, was an online web series that was one of our really interesting work. We think it was interesting. We created a work exclusive for Facebook, because Facebook were trying to experiment with showing videos on their platform, and we wanted a unique platform to share work. And Kenyans, actually, most of them are on Facebook. And so we uploaded an episode every Thursday at 7 p.m. And then after the episode, we asked the audience to vote what the protagonist would do in their subsequent episode. And so we were co-creating the film together with our audience. At least we gave them only 2 options so that we can narrow down our variables. But what happened is that it was a story of whistleblower who was shot dead because of telling the whistleblowing on the biggest heist on our economy. And we simulated his life, wondering what if he didn't die, if they shot him and he came back to teach Nairobi a lesson. And so we kidnapped bad people, and we asked Kenyans whether our protagonists should shoot them dead or survive them. And our assumptions were true, that Nairobians are really hectic people.
Everybody died.
Most people died, other than overlappers in traffic. So we tolerate our overlappers, but we shoot everyone else. It was a good social experiment, and to answer the question on the funding basket around film production, that's a difficult question we had to deal with, raising, I guess, $200,000 to shoot, $300,000 to shoot this episode. We looked for partnerships with civil society institutions that wanted to explore the question of criminal justice questions. We got some money from Facebook, who are trying to explore how their platforms would work. We created a basket through product placement, mostly partnerships, and we were able to realize more value actually than what we needed. But the work to generate and that kind of resource took quite a bit of time. And so if you can convince people that what they want in life is what you can produce, then you can get their money. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, HEVA continues to occupy a weird space, but it's a beautiful space for us because we think we are disrupting something. At the beginning of our exploration, we were looking at the question of creative livelihoods. How do we secure the artist that has to be paid for by government? Government is tired. Development partners are like, you've rebased your economy. Now you are a middle-income country, so pay for your arts. And then the artists are like, yo. So creative enterprise becomes one of the paths, and not the only path. But we realize that we can experiment using commercial models and impact money to create a pool of resources that goes into these creative businesses that have identified a market, that have a product, and that want to scale. And for those businesses, those particular businesses, and we realize in our ecosystem, we have received applications of over 3,000 eligible businesses in the East African market. These businesses need just some little bit of internal restructuring, some cash flow support, and they are ready now to go into the market and now fight as businesses for commercial investment in the marketplace. And we commit ourselves to continue doing the research, to provide innovative solutions, tailored financing, and also advisory services at a farm level and also at national level. At national level, we realize that there are some systemic things that need to shift. And so for a long time in Kenya, we asked the government to put up a fund that can do the basic work of infrastructure development, learning. And they asked us, where do we get this money? People are already overtaxed. As HEVA, we sponsored a motion in Parliament through our advocacy work to tax betting and licensing. And as of the finance bill of 2017, Kenya is the only country in Africa that's taxing betting and licensing at 35%, and all that money is earmarked for culture and the arts. And so we've created money for the public sector to start investing directly in creative industries and in the arts. Whether they manage that money better, how they do it, people like Patrick can advise them. But as far as we are concerned, we are focused on creative businesses. So as I close, I have to ask you, what is the future? The Africa Union has created a Vision 2063. I think it's the farthest any African imaginary has gone. Kenya thinks 2030, Namibia, Zimbabwe 2035, Morocco 20. Everyone is in this region when I'm still 35 to 40. But beyond that, let's think about 50 years from now. Where do we see ourselves? As we speak, there's a rise of big data. There's a rise of artificial intelligence. There's a consolidation of manufacturing, of literally anything, centralized in countries that have created an artificial zone to manufacture everything. Global logistics are being taken up by Alibaba and Amazon. So what is the role of communities in, say, 25 years from now? I will still be alive, hopefully, but I am terrified of that future. And how do I exist in that future? The only way to remain human in 25 years from now is to locate yourself within your context, is to produce for people things that they can touch, things that they identify with, stuff that cannot be replicated in a loom in the Netherlands in the name of African print. Are we together? The creative industries, they offer some answers to what happens 25 years from now. Advertising is dying. As a company, we spend more money on Facebook and Twitter advertising than any other form of advertising that could be. So local value chains that are producing advertising for television and media give them 5 years if they don't adapt. So what happens? We have to think about how to build creative value chains and circuits within our contexts. My commitment as HEVA is that we want to establish creative circuits. We want to make, my area is East Africa. I want a Kenyan artist to perform in 5 cities, live music cities, in 1 year. By the time they're done with the circuit, their financial year is over, which means they're performing to real live audiences. And we are looking to moving our new strategic investment in live music, in recorded music, in people industries, so that then we can hedge and bet on the future. So whoever wants to dismiss the creative industry, then you have a bet on artificial intelligence. So those are your 2 options going forward, or maybe the Chinese one belt reality. So as we want to cope with our reality now, we also have to think about who we will be, what kind of people we will be tomorrow. And that is our responsibility now, even as we are figuring out how we will eat today, how the Arts Council will get us money tomorrow. We have to think about the day after tomorrow.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it will be an injustice, not completely, but to this platform, because a lot of people have a dependency on the government, on public funding. You seem to have set a different precedence, and obviously to the scale that you're talking about in the countries that you're the amount of amounts that you're talking about here. Is that an important space to fill? Maybe not for the artists themselves, for anybody else who might be an impact investor. Why would you tell them to fill that space so that the dependency can kind of be shared amongst private players as well as the public sector? Why was it important for you to fill that gap?
Well, that is a thesis I will write for my doctorate. However, I feel that...
I remember you saying in South Africa when we were there, you said the reason why you did it is because you don't have an art council.
Yes. Well, East Africa entrepreneur-driven model. So a lot of young people leave school, they're told there's a youth fund, get a business. Few go abroad, and even fewer get to public universities that are out of touch with industry. So it's a zero-sum game in East Africa. The creative industries provide an easy entry, low barriers for entry at this point, low capitalization, but also if you put in some work, you can realize income very soon. If you look at any other industry other than agriculture that can at least give you 3 months, you put scale in the ground, you put some water, give it 3 months, yeah, you can exchange it for some value in 3 months. Creative economy also has a shorter leg room. The runway is short. So we are banking on the peculiarities of the creative industry. I met a Chinese advisor who was hired by the Kenyan government to advise on textiles. And this Chinese lady said that the reason that a lot of African governments are listening to the Chinese logic and not the European logic is that for a long time, the European logic requires that all factors be established before an industry grows. The Chinese model, they realize that they cannot create a perfect situation, a policy that works, equality for everyone. So they're like, no, we won't bother with that stuff. We will create safe zones. So we bring the people within textiles in one pack and give them all they need to be competitive. And that's how they have become what they have become. And a lot of governments are starting to get that model and say, hey, let's make industrial parks for leather. Forget social justice, forget public institutions that are learning. Let's train the people who are inside the park. And that's a model that's growing here, and we cannot ignore it. But what we think is that the creative industry has the capacity to locate value within communities, has the capacity to return value, especially through intellectual property, back to the artists and back to resident communities. And so, to answer that question in
circumvented.
Yes, I feel that we have the opportunity through creative industries, and if we can conscientiously design a strategy to grow home-based value that's shared through tight and deep context networks. And I'm betting on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Gachara from he's a Nairobian. Well, thank you very much for staying an additional hour. I think it shows our commitment. Like Michelle said, if we don't put the time in, we won't get the output. Until tomorrow, human creativity is a vital economic, social, and cultural resource. We'll start at 9 o'clock, and we hope to see you all here. Have a good night.